Hello, Church House. This is me, Daniel Hornsby, tuning back in. This is part 2 to pray for others, especially those ones that are stubborn sheep. Yes, this is part 2 to that first video I just made, and just tuning back in to continue the story. And if you didn't get to see the first part, just check into the first part. It was a video right before this one, which is, like I said. And anyways, the second part to this is I started praying for the man in the parking lot at Walmart, and I started interceding for him, and I started crying for him and his soul, because I seen that he was being stubborn. And I was like, Lord, don't let not one fish get past us. And and I was like, and just open his eyes and open his ears and let him hear loud and clear, Lord, what the word of the Lord has to say, and draw him nigh unto you and make him a mighty vessel for you, and fill him full of your spirit, and let him see that you love him so much, Lord God. And next thing you know, I was after I started crying, and then the Lord brought back to remembrance something that the man said to me as I was working with him up there on one day. And he said, he was talking to another man, because he wouldn't talk to me, but he was talking to another employee, and he told him, he said, I'm just lucky to be alive. He said, I had my umbilical cord get wrapped around my neck, and he said it about choked me to death whenever I was being born. And right before that, whenever I was talking to him at Tractor Farm Supply, I remembered what I'd said, and I told him, I said, it was Jesus that gave you that job, because if it wasn't for Jesus, I said, you wouldn't even have had that first breath in your lungs. He loved you before he even put you in there, and before you was even formed. And God brought that back to remembrance, that I'd said that to that man whenever I was over there at Tractor Farm Supply. And he said, don't you remember what I told you, what you said in the spirit over there when you was talking to him? And it brought back to remembrance what that man said when he was on that grill. And like I told him, I said, if it wasn't for God, you wouldn't even got that very first breath. And and it dawned on that man. And I went back like 2 weeks later, and I went back because I didn't have all the pieces that I needed for my dog chain. And I went back and I seen him again, and he had a whole different attitude then, and he was being all friendly. And he was like, oh, hi guys, did you get everything you needed last time? And I was like, no, I was like, I still needed one more piece. And he was like, oh, I'd be glad to help you, and he was just being all friendly this time, totally different attitude, all because of praying and interceding and standing in the doorway for somebody that didn't want to accept Christ. It was an atheist and was an antichrist against God and had a grudge against God. But, and then as I was leaving, I told him, I said, and you have a blessed day. And he looked at me and he said, and you too. And everybody that knowed the man, I talked to him and I told him all about it afterwards. I was like, pray for people, because you don't ever know what somebody's going through, and you don't know how you can change their heart just for praying for them. And they all looked at me and thought they couldn't believe that he said that. And that's just how God works.